So I'll tell you what baffles me these days.
What?
These new Samsung commercials. They keep talking about how these phones, you can share your charge with somebody. You just put them together. And granted, you and I don't go out, especially weekends and whatnot like that anymore. But I do remember when we did, and if you came up to me and were like, hey, man, my phone's getting kind of low, it's dying. Can I get some juice off you? I'm most likely going to be like, no, because then my phone's going to be dead, and how am I going to be able to use my phone later? It does not seem, as the commercials portray it, in my opinion.
That's not where I thought you were going to go with that.
You say that every time I start out with something.
I know, but, I thought you were going to say something like the only way I'm sharing a charge with someone is back at the apartment late at night.
Well, then they don't need a charge. I got a cord.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Edwards, and with me is Zeke Baker, and together we make the Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for making us a part of your day. Zeke was a little sick. He's back. We had the guys from Bring Dad a Beer come in. It was a call to the bullpen, brought to you by Budweiser. And now Zeke's back. Zeke, it's great to have you back. Say hi.
Howdy, howdy. Happy to be back as always.
And we have another returning friend, one of people we love talking to. We talk to him probably more than he likes, but he's one of our good friends in the industry, Sean Josephs from Pinhook. Thank you so much for coming back. It's great to have you here in the makeshift studio.
It is great to be here. We got home garden TV on instead of the Warriors Raptors, but,
I feel really bad because when Sean and I were talking, he goes, I really want to watch this game tonight. And I said, oh, it's great. My apartment building has these meeting rooms. There's a TV in there. No problem. I want to watch the game too. And then we get here, and it is a huge, colossal swing and a miss.
We're good.
Although we do get to watch House Hunters International.
Yes, exactly.
And I hate the House Hunters International because they're always doing rentals. It's never a purchase. They're always renting something opposed to buying something. Do I spend more time in this room than I should?
Yes, you do, because I have not seen that show.
Also seems very anti-productive when you're in this room.
Why?
Well, if you pay that much attention to the show, you can't spend too much time on worky.
Oh, I'm editing. I'm editing our podcast. All sorts of stuff like that.
What, like 2 or 3 words? There's not that much to take out.
Sure. So, Sean, what have you been up to, and what's the score of the game right now?
Okay. Oh, man. The Warriors were up most of the game.
Did the Raptors?
And now the Raptors are up 103-97. So,
are they going to close it out tonight?
I think they might.
What is there? A guy on the Raptors, who was it? He has some billionaire guy said you can use my house whenever you want.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Some guy said if you bring a championship to Toronto, you basically get anything I have whenever you want.
That's amazing. I haven't had that offer yet.
Imagine being an NBA player and getting offers like that. I have a bunch of shit. If you want to use any of it,
yeah, just bring a championship to the city, and we're good to go.
Yeah. But at the same time, you got to be like, I'm going to Toronto. Thanks for the deal. How am I going to pull this off?
Well, maybe he has jets or other stuff.
I'm just saying they're not typically known as a top tier team.
Oh man, when they had Vince Carter though, they were good. That was 20 years ago.
Jesus, what date yourself there, Edwards?
I remember watching Vince Carter and all those crazy slam dunks. That was fun to watch.
He was amazing.
He stayed in the league longer than about anybody.
He did. Didn't he push close to 40?
I mean, that class had some, that UNC class that came out with him had some amazing athletes in general, but he definitely just hung around the league and, was never dead weight.
But if you think about it, a lot of those guys that were there then, again, news today too, though, Tony Parker just retired.
Yeah.
He was 40.
Yeah.
You had, but those group of people when Vince was around, didn't Zoe play till he was 40?
Yeah.
A lot of those guys pushed it. They were in there for a long time. Miss Larry Johnson, though.
I love
Grandmama.
Larry Johnson.
I remember when he used to play with Muggsy. That was
Yeah.
great times in Charlotte.
Was it, Muggsy Bogues was 5'3".
Yes.
That is a point of fact. He played in the NBA and he's 5'3".
Well, he and Spud Webb.
But Spud Webb was like 5'8".
Was he?
Right?
But point of contention,
Yeah, I think
Muggsy
so.
Bogues was 5'3.5". I read
okay,
his
fair
book.
point. Sorry.
Read his book,
His
huh?
proud of the,
I did
the half
read
an
it.
inch was like.
I
This
did
last week or when?
No, when I was younger, I read the Muggsy Bogues book, and I retained the information. He was 5'3.5".
Do you remember when Spud Webb won the slam dunk competition?
Yeah.
That was great. No, I think that was that him? No, I think that was D. Brown. I thought that was D. Brown.
No, it was
Wasn't
the Celtics. D. Brown.
D. Brown was the guy.
He did the arm over the head?
Yeah. He also, you want to talk about dating myself? His whole thing, D. Brown, before his big dunk, was those were when they had the Reebok pumps.
Yep.
So there was a pump in the tongue of the shoe. And so that was like considered to be this awesome thing where he got down on his, like on one knee and pumped up his shoe before his signature
I remember
dunk.
my first pair of pumps, actually.
I had the Shaq pumps. They were black and blue, and the pump was blue, and the shoe was black. I had the Shaq pumps.
For all the dunks, though, going back to Vince Carter, it was the one where he put his elbow in the rim. That was one of the all-time, I think, will always stand up. I mean, of course, there's Jordan from the free throw line, although plenty of people have done that since. But he hung from his, like the crook of his arm.
But D. Brown dabbed before it was a thing.
Yes, he did.
He did it before the
Yes, he
Migos did.
did.
And he did
He's
it
out
while
of the
dunking
curve.
a basketball. So, gotta have some Celtic pride.
Yeah,
Not
man.
too many Celtics if you think about it.
Yeah.
For us to that's our team.
Yes.
And a lot of the people on Antoine Walker, he was not a dunker.
Yeah.
He was a walker. He would just
Yeah.
walk and shoot a three. Then Paul Pierce wasn't really a dunker. Ray
Yeah.
Allen. Kevin Garnett, I mean, he dunked, but it wasn't like he was more aggressive.
So look, I know we're fully off on a tangent now, but if we're really going to talk about this, how about, like, whatever happened to the quirky role player? There were so many. So I'm thinking, I'll focus on the Celtics because that was my team. The Greg Kites of the world. Like, his only job was to come in the game and maul people. And then you had someone like Jerry Seasting, Scott Wedman. You had all these, like, unusual guys who would just come in and fulfill this very specific role.
So the Celtics had
But they don't have those.
Scalabrine.
And Scalabrine, that's another good one. But they don't. But who are those players now? You don't really have, like, they only play like 6, 7 deep. They don't have these quirky dudes, and the guy comes into the game, and it almost seems like he can't play basketball, but he's like somehow either good at punching people in the face or just doing one thing really well.
There's no anymore.
That part has gone.
the NBA said we don't like it. I think after Meta World Peace went into the stands, you had all that
That's a
stuff
good point.
going on. I don't think they encouraged the violence like those old rivalries where the Pistons were going after everyone.
What about Vinny the Microwave Johnson? You just never knew when he was going to come in, and no pun intended, obviously. That was his nickname, Heat Up. You just didn't know with that guy. He had a very unusual looking shot, and some days he would come in and he wasn't on, and some days they would just feed him the ball over and over again, and he would just drop 25 points in a half. Like,
Tony Delk was like that, though, for the Celtics for a while, too, where he was the solid sixth man.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he was a baller at Kentucky, and then he would just come in off the bench for the Celtics and just drain threes. So, there's still that role player, but
what about the Dennis Rodman? Even someone, and I guess I'm saying, forget about his weirdness with all his stuff, but just someone who could change the game just sheerly with rebounding, energy, and defense.
Well, yeah, and it wasn't,
do you see what I'm saying?
Like size either.
Who would you point to in the league who's like that? I mean, maybe almost like a Draymond Green, but not even. Draymond Green has more skills with the ball.
he
like
can bomb
Dennis
threes.
Rodman almost couldn't. All he could do was like catch a ball under the basket and get an occasional
Rodman
layup. Like,
was
he
that
really
style.
had no. Did he have any offensive skill set, Dennis Rodman?
No,
Like, he couldn't put the ball on the floor. He couldn't shoot from outside. He couldn't play in the post. Like, all he did was occasionally get an offensive rebound and put it back.
yeah,
right?
that was
What I really remember is the guy that was big with Detroit. What was his name? Ben something? Had the big hair?
Ben Wallace.
Yeah. That's the last, defensive
That's a great
player that I
point.
can really think of.
Yeah.
But you had, if you think about it, even for the Celtics, like
Yeah.
Rajon Rondo, and I know I'm being biased as a Kentucky grad, bringing up a lot of those Kentucky players.
Rondo was also quirky, right?
Rondo was
not
quirky.
Not much of a shooter.
Not much of a talker either, because I used to have to interview him when I was at ESPN Radio.
Just had nothing to say.
He just is a soft-spoken individual.
Okay.
Long arms. His wingspan was crazy, and trying to get by him and trying to blow by him college to the pros, he was so underrated defensively. Wasn't going to be the guy who was going to be a run and gun. Like, he wouldn't have fit in Calipari's. I'm wrong. He would have fit in Calipari's, but he's not like the John Walls or those other types of point guards. He's really good at distributing the ball, and he's really good at just running and playing defense.
They used to call it a true point guard, of which there aren't many. Like on the Celtics, it was Dennis Johnson originally. Yeah. Like, he was like, Dennis Johnson's job was to pass the ball to other people and make a jumper at the elbow when it became available. Like,
and
that
now
was
you see
basically
point guards that get 25, 10, and 10, and you wonder how it happens.
Different game these days.
But I will say a lot of these teams are built around, and it's LeBron's problem in LA right now, and you need three people. And anybody who says that Jordan won it on its own,
oh my God, what a team!
What a team they
Kerr,
had there.
Just even those the Kerrs, the Paxsons,
Tony
Rodman,
Kukoc,
Cartwright,
Pippen.
Well, of course, Pippen.
But I mean, the Celtics with the big three in the '80s to the big three in the aughts, and then you had the Lakers.
How about the Pistons? Lambier, Thomas, Rodman. Joe Dumars. My God. Joe Dumars was one of the best shooting guards to ever play the game.
You need a team around people. I mean, look at what's happening right now to the Warriors. I mean, Curry is an amazing player, but you take those other guys out, and his two other big players are kind of riding. Thank God Boogie got involved, but it wasn't enough. I think the game's over now, probably.
Well, someone pointed out that the Warriors, in order to get Durant, basically gave up all the Harrison Barnes, right? They gave up all those role players when they had a bunch of injuries. There was really no one to go to. It's 106-105 Warriors with 29 seconds to go.
Oh, I have it up too. Welcome back to Dad's Drinking Bourbon Sports. We'll be here all night.
We like bourbon too, right?
Speaking of which, we will move on. But Zeke, you're going away this weekend. I'm going away too.
Did they used to say that when you go to prison? I thought that was specifically like, he's going away.
That's always kind of, third person kind of thing. Yeah, Daddy's got to go away for a little while.
Well, on a good note, you're going away on a vacation. I am going to East Tennessee. I'm going to go camping.
Nice.
Are you taking any whiskey with you?
Actually, I thought about that today as I was loading up boxes on boxes to get everything out for the Father's Day stuff. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I haven't fixed any rounds or anything for myself for this trip.
Well, thankfully, you have high camp flasks, right?
I do.
That's something where you could take the Firelight flask, which is a 750 milliliter flask, or the Half-Light flask, which is a 375 milliliter flask. Both of these flasks are going to have those 6-shooter tumblers that are magnetically, you hear that? That's loud.
Yeah.
But it's almost, it looks like a bullet almost when you take it off. It's a 6-shooter tumbler. It magnetically seals to the flask. When you open this thing up, it has the no drip lip on the flask itself. So this thing is not going to leak on you. It is vacuum sealed for both hot and cold temperature drinks. So you could put some coffee in here if you want, which I know you are not a coffee drinker. I am. But you could put some whiskey in here if you want to, or you could put something cold.
Yeah, the only time I'm going to get much coffee is literally to mask the smell or the taste of the bourbon that might come back off my breath so I don't get in too much trouble.
Well, true. Maybe you could put something in the Half-Light and then put your whiskey in the Firelight.
Well, Not be a good balance.
You take them both out into the woods with
Or maybe vice versa, since that one holds the 750 mLs. I got to have my priorities.
No, that's what I'm saying. You put the whiskey in the 750.
Yeah.
So go to highcampflask.com, use code DDB until Father's Day. You will get 20% off. Visit them at High Camp Flask on Instagram. Check out the flasks. They're good people, good stuff. You're going to take yours with you, right, Zeke?
Yes, sir.
So what's the camping whiskey? So if I'm sitting, and again, perpetuating cliche, but I happen to like a Corona with lime in the right situation. If I was going out to a nice restaurant and I decided I want to have a beer before my meal, I'm not going to order a Corona. But if I'm in New Orleans where I live and it's like 110 degrees with 95% humidity, a Corona with lime seems like the perfect beer for the occasion. So if you're out in the woods...
I think it depends on what time of the year.
Okay, well, you're going, but you guys are going camping, so we're in spring. You're going camping, in the next week or so.
So it could still be 90 to 100 degrees.
Yeah. So what's your campfire end of the day, whiskey that just makes you feel like you have the perfect whiskey for that situation?
This kind of gets to you because being a restaurateur, being a wine sommelier, you think about pairings quite a bit.
Yeah.
It also depends on the time of the day. If it's the middle of the day and I am not kissing ass to the person sitting next to me, it's going to be something a little bit lighter, like Pinhook. I think some of the recent releases you've had have been really good for me. I always call them the lawnmower pours because it's something that you want to have that you're sitting on the lawnmower going around mowing your lawn. It could be really hot out. It's not going to kill you. At night, I'd want maybe a heavier pour, so like a Four Roses or a Russell's Reserve pick, something a little bit heavier, like a Stag Junior.
Yeah.
This sounds more like you're at home, not on a camping trip. To me, I'm camping. I'm thinking I've got limited space.
Ooh. Golden State won 106, 105.
That's crazy.
I'm sorry. At least I feel bad that I did not keep you from missing the last game, though.
No, that's even better. No, you're 100% right. That was not the last game.
Yeah.
There's more basketball to be seen.
So what's heavier than a 750 ml bottle? You're not going to pack 3 or 4 of those things in there. So I don't know if I have a single thing in mind, but it's literally something cash strength, bang for the buck. If I want it cash strength, it's good. If I need to just water it down to 90, I'm going to stretch it out further than most other products. So I think camping-wise, that's literally my simple train of thought is, what do I have here that I've got a full bottle of that's high proof? So if need be, I can stretch out this one bottle and it's going to last me longer than if I packed in a 95, 100 proofer bottle that, especially if I put a little water in there, it might be gone after the first night and then I'm kind of up shit's creek.
I just want to know where the hell they are that house is $428,000 because I want to go move there. That house is like a mansion for $428,000.
I think on my travels I've been there.
What about you? What's your camping pour? Listening to Zeke, I do have to concede he's right. Just pack one thing, pack a cast strength, and then you can proof it down. Yes, you win. Okay.
I think it's got to be something that you feel good drinking straight from the bottle. Now, I remember on a
late night passing it around, and there's no glassware or even cups, quote unquote.
I mean, I hate to go back, but I mean, Jim Beam White Label. That just seems like the thing. You're sitting by the fire. You got your Jim Beam White Label. That's 80 proof.
See, I've been there plenty of times. It's just I learned the hard way of that's the fire around the house. So if you wake up the next morning and everything's empty, you can still run to the store and reload.
That's a good point.
Versus being out in the woods or the bush or whatever you want to call it. And there's not any stores around here. And who wiped out all the booze? Because today's going to not be fun if I'm sober the whole time.
I will say everything comes full circle, and then we'll talk about Pinhook here, but Jim Beam White Label just makes me think of college and taping it to the inside of my leg to go see college basketball games. Because the SEC has that stupid policy that they just have rescinded about selling alcohol at games. All of us, we just tape Jim Beam White Label to the inside. You can get those flasks, the plastic ones, that are a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. And being a big guy, they just make me tape most of them to the inside of my leg. And then
I think to your point, I said Jim Beam White Label because that's what I remember drinking on a camping trip. So for me, it would be sentimental in that way. That's good. But I also think it's fascinating to me the way that I think that all the Russell stuff aside, there's so many people who've never been able to get past their association with turkey from college.
Literally my thought process.
And Wild Turkey makes such amazing whiskey, as you all know. I mean, I remember I was flying to Europe and asked the flight attendant, for a bourbon. They brought me something in a glass, and I tasted it. They didn't tell me what it was. I didn't see them pour it. It wasn't like a mini bottle. They poured it back in the galley, whatever. And I tasted it, and I was like, holy crap, this is phenomenal. And I asked her, when next time she swung by, I was like, what is that? And she brought me the bottle. It was Wild Turkey. I think it was like the 101.
Well, I was going to say, that's what's so funny is most of us all have good memories of Beam from, that time frame in life. But nobody has good memories of turkey from back around 1820.
I didn't mind turkey. And I think 101 is just phenomenal.
It is.
You missed out on some good field parties there.
But they're still fighting. I still think they're fighting that perception in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Among a certain generation.
Oh, it took me forever to really get past that. You hear folks, you got to try this turkey. I'm like, no, sorry. I just can't get past that memory.
But, I mean, that's why also it's like, I know you guys are into doing it, but certainly from my wine experience, and I think it's a good idea with whiskey, too, is you got to taste stuff blind. And, just see what you think when you have no idea what you're tasting and when you don't know what the age is and you don't know what it is and you don't know what it cost. And I always found in wine it was like the most humbling experience. I mean, I was in situations which you can't really do with whiskey where the goal was to actually guess, like, well, what grape is it and from what part of the world and what's the vintage, and you're like drilling down more in that way.
Those tests are crazy that you had to take.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But I think applying it, I mean, it wouldn't really work for bourbon in the same way. But I think sitting down with 4 glasses of bourbon where you have no clue what you're tasting and just making your impressions about quality, which ones speak to you, and then finding out what they are after the fact, I think is something that everybody should do.
And you gave us something. I mean, proof is in the pudding. You gave us something when we first sat around this table, and you said, do you want me to tell you what it is, or do you just want to sip it and we'll talk about it, and then I'll tell you what it is? And Zeke and I both said, let's sip it and we'll talk about it, and then you can tell us what it is. And speaking of which, that was your 2-year Castle and Key Pinhook distillate.
Correct.
That is your stuff. It's not MGP.
Correct.
You're not ready to release that yet.
No.
But Zeke and I both said, I did not get youth on it. I think it had a nice cinnamon spice to it, but Zeke described it as drinking Lipton's lemon iced tea.
Lipton iced tea. I'll stick with that as a solid note for me.
It just went down so easy. What proof was that?
I don't even know. I mean, the barrel entry proof is 120. So when you pull a sample from a barrel, you don't take the proof, but
not diluted. Most importantly,
yeah, it was not diluted. Whatever it was.
You hope it's not over 160, and then you just kind of.
Yeah, but it's
somewhere between 120 and 160.
Yeah, but I'm glad you all enjoyed it. I mean, you're talking about something that maybe will be released as another year down the road or a little bit longer, but somewhere around that time frame. But to be that tasty, I think, and complex and interesting at 2 years old is a good sign.
Well, and fun, at least for us. Maybe it's not so much the masses, but when it does come out in a product, whether what that age be, we can say, oh, well, here's what it was when we had it at this age, and you can literally see how it's grown and moved, so to speak. Which I don't think many of us, other than the folks that are lucky enough to be in the RICS for their job or whatnot, are really going to see how something progresses and moves to have that perspective of wow, this is really fully matured now. Because I remember when I had it last year, I liked this and didn't like that, but now this is what I'm getting off of it.
Well, I think what you're saying, which is kind of cool to me, is that, and I think it's what I'd like to think makes Pinhook different, is that it really came ultimately from the enthusiast perspective. Meaning, I'm not saying this to blow smoke, but I don't see myself as any different from you guys and probably a lot of people who listen to your podcast or are just like serious enthusiasts.
You just make better drinks than us. I mean, if you go back to some of that stuff that you used to do in your restaurants, you know how to make a hell of a cocktail.
But I think still my point, though, is like, we all love bourbon, or presumably everyone listening to this loves bourbon. And if you took it from the approach of like, you weren't trained as a chemist, you didn't grow up as in the Beam family, you have no legacy, you're just someone who loves it, and then you get put not put in a position, you just decide. We were lucky to make this, leap back in 2010 when it was very affordable to buy MGP, at the time LDI barrels. And, I think we talked about this on another show, but to reiterate we paid $465 a barrel for 3-year-old bourbon. So we were paying about $1.75 in terms of the liquid for a 750 ml for 3-year-old bourbon, which would be, 10x that now if you could even get your hands on it.
I so wish I knew that.
So do so many other people. And so it was really just dumb luck. But I guess what I was getting at to what Zeke was saying is, I feel like we've always taken an enthusiast approach, and because of that, we just have a different mentality. It's not a better mentality. It's just a different thought process. And part of what we've done is basically showcase the things that you're talking about that you normally don't get to see, right? So we were talking about going back to the MGP thing next year. Basically all of our, the majority of our core products, so our everyday bourbon and rye, our cask strength bourbon and rye, our single barrels will all be Castle and Key Pinhook product. We still have MGP barrels left. So I was trying to think of something, again, going back to what Zeke was saying, something that would be fun and maybe give people an experience that they haven't had before. And that would just be, I think it will be collectible, but also hopefully interesting, educational, and fun. And so the vertical series, as we're calling it, which it'll be labeled as such, this fall, Pinhook 4-year-old MGP bourbon with an age statement on it, released for the next 9 years, 1 year older each year. So you collect age 4 to age 12. I'll proof each year at whatever I think is the perfect, the sweet spot for each batch.
So it essentially starts at bourbon country, right? And then
it is exactly. Yeah. And actually that's a great point for anyone who really wants to nerd out. If you truly want the full collection, you can collect age 3 through 12, which would be bourbon country. So that said, in order to make the vertical less confusing, we're anchoring it to one horse. That horse is Bourbon War. Okay. So the fall, the vertical bourbon release this fall is Bourbon War, and will remain Bourbon War age 4 to age 12. But if you want to collect the full thing, you need the 3-year-old Bourbon Country as well. Exactly.
Which, not to take it back to sports, but really wish Bourbon War had a better trip in the Preakness and the Belmont.
Yes, me too.
I was pulling for him. Think he kind of had a bad trip in the Preakness.
Yes, he did.
Wasn't really sure what was going on there. I'm sure Jamie Hill had some words. Anyways, we know that there is going to be another bourbon horse that will be in the Triple Crown again. For those of you that don't know what Pinhook does, there is 2 sides of Pinhook. There is the horse racing aspect with Bourbon Lane Stables, where they actually have horses that run and race. And then there's the other side where Sean is really the brains behind, and that is the whiskey side of it, but each release is named after a horse, right?
Correct. So yeah, the idea is really, in terms of what's in the bottle, the ethos is really to make vintages of bourbon and vintages of rye. So every year, if you buy, the everyday Pinhook bourbon or rye on the shelf, which is typically selling for, $35, $37, depending on where you are, that is blended and proofed to be the best expression of the barrels that we have ready at that time. And we're not trying to recreate the same flavor profile year after year. That is what I guess I'd say everyone else is doing. And so I don't think what we're doing is better, but it is just it's a different approach, which is to say, what if you looked at the barrels that you had, and instead of trying to recreate the same flavor profile at the same proof, year over year. You took those barrels and just tried to make them the best that they possibly could be. So if you tasted 2 vintages of rye next to each other, or tasted 2017 rye and 2018 rye, you would say, hopefully, that they both taste good. And even if they were the same mash bill, that they taste nothing like each other. And so it helped showcase what you were talking about, which you guys know so well, is there so many variables in weather and humidity and the barrels themselves and everything that's going on that lead to the barrels themselves being unique from year to year. And instead of trying to figure out, okay, looking at all these barrels, is there some combination we can put them together in that makes them taste the same year after year after year? Instead, we're saying, let's just try to make them what at least I perceive to be the best. And who cares if it tastes like the last vintage? And
well, everybody likes a good change of pace. And I hadn't really thought of that till now, but it almost seems to play kind of on the single barrel craze somewhat. Is
exactly.
We've all got labels and brands that we love and love the single barrel picks, and then inevitably love to line those up and all right, well, let's see which one's the best, or which one do we like the most this day. So now you almost have, at least it would seem to me, a small batch, not a single barrel, but it's still annually it's going to change in its entire profile. So there'll be some consistency to it, but at the same time, it'll give you something to talk about, something to measure up. And yeah, we all don't love the same stuff, but that's what makes it fun.
I think there's also something about, and this comes from like the kind of my experience in the wine business, and it does get expressed in bourbon through single barrels. It's the ephemeral nature of something that you like. You were part of a single barrel pick, or you went to your favorite store and they said that they picked a barrel, and they're like, I'm sorry, you can only buy one bottle of it, and you taste it and you're like, God, this is the best bourbon I've ever had, and you're in love with it. And on the one hand, you want to keep tasting it because you love it so much, and on the other hand, you're aware that it will never exist again,
and you have to ration it,
and you have to think of it, but it's like you can't hoard it. It's like, what's the point of not drinking it? And it comes to this thing, in the wine business, they would always say, there are no great wines. They're just great bottles of wine, right? Because of wine, it's even more the idea that, like, barometric pressure, each bottle has its own chemical reactions. I mean, I think bourbon is doing less, far less in the bottle once it's bottled, but still the idea that, like, you have that bottle and it's special, and when it's gone, but it makes you love it more. Oh, yeah. It would be another thing to have, like, maybe you have your favorite everyday bourbon. There's no point even picking a name. There's so many good ones out there, and you love it. But guess what? When it runs out, you can just go buy another one. So I think you feel almost more connected, and you get more joy out of it for knowing that it won't last forever. And so, to Zeke's point, we're doing that even with our core product, which is that, at some point, our first rye that we ever made was Pinhook. The horse was bourbon and rye, which, by the way, apologies, that was very confusing for many people out there who thought that it was a blend of bourbon and rye. It was a long explanation. But, at some point, like, I have an attachment to that for it being the first rye that we ever made. I've tasted it so many times. And when I come back to it, if I haven't tasted it in like a month or whatever it is, I'm like, oh man, it makes me think back to, it was the first product that actually came out of Castle and Key / the Old Taylor distillery since it was closed.
Oh, man,
again, it wasn't made there, but it was the first thing to be bottled there since the distillery basically shut down in 1972. So I just have a connection to it. So the idea is at some point, bourbon and rye will be gone, and you can never get it again, or there'll be bottles floating around.
I would have brought it down. I have some up there. I should mention, I don't want to take you off, and I know there are certain people that will kick me for cutting you off, but I should mention, we have Bourbon Country on the table. We have Rye Humor on the table. We have Bourbon Courage, the true single barrel, on the table. We've been going through those. We have some other assorted things on the table too, but it's really these are the three that we're going through of yours, and then you brought the Castle and Key for us to try. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So as we're talking through this, I should have brought down bourbon and rye as well, but just so people know, we are sipping on a lot of stuff while we're actually talking to Sean here.
Some great variety
but
here.
Keep going. Sorry. You were talking about bourbon and rye and about
just
how
the vintages, and I think it's kind of like my hope is just that it brings something kind of interesting, and then I think in the restaurant business, I think you're always looking for some sort of emotional connection. I mean, when you walk into a restaurant and you have one of those amazing experiences, it's the combination of all of these factors, who you're with, the particular night, the decor, the music, all of those kinds of things. And I think I'm very sensitive to this idea that it's those connections that in a way can enhance something. And I hope in a way that that this is bringing a little bit of that aspect to the world of bourbon, which is that people will feel more of this connection to something that's like comes and goes in the different vintages, and they'll be interested in the next vintage, and they'll feel a little bit of that like wistful sadness when they have that last pour of bourbon and rye, knowing that they'll maybe never get their hands on it again. But it kind of like, in a way, I think it could enhance the bourbon drinking experience.
See, the way I live my life is I live my life based off of the great philosopher Axl Rose, who taught me that nothing lasts forever, even cold November rain. So if you
said it well.
If you go through and just know that nothing's going to last forever, you just enjoy it for
you enjoy it, and you enjoyed it even more.
Yeah,
John, you did recently post the pictures while you were moving of all the boxes with bottles you've been hoarding. So I'm not really sure.
They were double, so a lot of those were the ones.
We all saw the stuff that's still waiting to be consumed.
The majority of those were backups, so I would go buy two of a pick. For Sean's point exactly, that I know I'm going to have this, and I'm going to wish somewhere down the line I had another bottle. So someday you will thank me for having done that.
Well, I will say though, and we'll keep this to a very brief tangent, on the lines of having the backup. Because we all do it. We all buy that second one thinking, I better go and get another one of these. I really liked it.
And after this move, I friggin' wish I never did that.
But also with the way the market is, constantly new products coming out, etc., and just the FOMO that we all have over seeing different things and some advertisement always being in your face. Does it really make sense that much of the time to buy the backup? Or you just turn into a hoarder and it's something you never get to.
100%.
I'll jump in saying I've got plenty of backups that I don't even know I have them, that I'm digging through. Like, I had two of those? Shit, I still didn't drink the first one. But the time you buy it, it really makes a whole lot of sense.
I say this with no judgment against anyone else. I've always been a drinker, not a collector. Like I just have, even, Pinhook aside, like I just never, wine, whiskey. I was just never one of those people to like accumulate. And I was also, I'll be the first person. I'm going to empty out whatever bottle it is. I'm not waiting to be like, I can't let it go. I'm going to drink it all.
No, and it's one of those things where, Zeke, to your point, I think I had the best intentions in buying two.
Yeah, it's something you really liked and you thought, hey, it's a single barrel. I probably won't get a second one of these. I really like it. I should, get a backup. But I think, at least for me, where I was kind of thinking was, we never really put in perspective of gauge, well, how much do I really like it? Yeah, it's really good. But the next three picks that some store somebody puts out, they're probably going to be really good too. Am I ever going to take the time to really circle back and it be that significant? I think that's a line that most of us miss. And admittedly, there's all stuff that we should have drank that thing 2 nights ago. Shit.
And I think there's things too, Zeke, when you get to where we are, in the sense of, and it's nothing better than anybody else, but we're in multiple groups, right? So, Sean, if you think about it, we're in the Bourbon Cartel, we're in Legacy, there's Whiskey House, there's all these places, and then there's all these stores that we're friends with.
Yeah.
And nobody gives anything to us. We pay just like anybody else, but think about all those places, especially in the bourbon groups we're in, it's just an automatic, like, I'm going to take two. I'm going to support the cause. I'm not going to be that guy if we go pick a barrel that goes and just takes one and then puts somebody else on the hook for my share. So it's safe to say that we at least get two of every pick that we're a part of or every pick that comes out. So, Zeke, I think when you talk about hoarding, it's like you get those and then you get the other backups that you think you need, and then at the end of the day, I don't really need them. It's going to be one of those things where I almost want to just buy a storage unit, put those in there, and then come back in like 10 to 15 years and say, anybody who is friends with me, I am going to have the most kick-ass bottle share in 10 to 15 years, opening up this shit from 2016 to 2019 that I hoarded, and we're all going to open it.
I'll be there.
Yeah, you can come. Bringing it back to you, because people don't want to hear us talk, but bringing it back to you. So the last time we had you on, you were just getting Bourbon Country out. It was the orange wax
Correct.
Bourbon Country, which was not a cast strength.
Correct.
But it was still not 90 proof.
Correct.
And
yeah, that one we proofed at 95.5.
you had just got Bourbon and Rye out, and then you were working on Bourbon Country.
Yeah.
But we got to have a early sip of Bourbon Country while you were there. There's a lot of stuff you guys have been doing as you moved. So if you think about where you were as a brand, you bought up all this MGP back when it was $465 a barrel. That stuff eventually ran out to the point where you were releasing it every 6 months.
Right.
Aging it as you went. So you almost had that old vertical of the 90 proof stuff.
Correct.
You've now moved to a younger distillate of MGP, but the regular Bourbon Country was 95.5. This Bourbon Country that you've released at 115.3.
Yes.
That was one that was a blend of 75 MGP barrels.
Correct.
So you've been a busy guy. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing from last year to this year in the sense of kind of you have this interim MGP as the Castle and Key is waiting to come out. We talked about that. That was really, really good. The Castle and Key distillate. Can't wait to see what happens after you let that sit for another year. But what have you been doing?
Yeah, we have been busy.
There's been a lot.
Yeah, so
going on.
I think
Rye Humor came out.
Yeah, so from when I first came on the show, like the first time, all we had to taste was our first ever rye, Bourbon and Rye, right?
Well, I brought some of the older 90 proof
and we had
stuff.
some of that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like what we had in the market, and it was the only thing being sold in Tennessee at the time was we had one SKU. By the end of this year, we will have released 7 different products. So we will have Bourbon Country Bourbon, Rye Humor, which is our second vintage of rye, cast strength bourbon. We have a cast strength rye coming out in the fall, which I am very excited about. I'm like, I run the risk of probably losing credibility because every time there's like something new that we do that's different, I always say that that's my favorite. Like when the cast strength bourbon came out, I was like, I really think this is my favorite. And I mean it, you know. But the cast, I mean, you guys know obviously that younger rye is more complex and tends to be more interesting at a younger age than bourbon does. The cast strength rye that's coming out this fall is, I think, incredible.
I remember how excited you were when the True Single Barrel was coming out.
Oh, yeah.
And you were just texting me. You're like, man, this is going to be awesome. And then Bourbon Country came out at 150. We're sipping on this now.
I love this cast strength, though.
I really like this Bourbon Country.
I like it a lot.
And I want to talk to you about this because how the hell do you blend 75 MGP barrels? Like, as you're sitting there, we know you take a lot of trips up to Castle and Key.
Yes.
What is actually involved in blending 75 barrels together?
So we always get a lot of credit for being fully transparent. So I'm going to continue in that. So for reasons of time and my other kind of like obligations, responsibilities, which is mostly running around all over the country, trying to introduce people to Pinhook and work with our distributors, from California to Minnesota and so on and so forth. We really rely on the team at Castle and Key to do the nuts and bolts of blending. They have some awesome folks there. What I'm ultimately doing is I'm getting options based on a lot of legwork that they have put in, because to put together, for example, this cast strength, in the way that they do it, which, again, I can't say I know how every other distillery works, but it is a lot of hours. It's not just grabbing 75 barrels and mixing them together and crossing your fingers. It's, for a moment, let me talk about the cast strength rye just because it's fresher in my memory. In order to get to the cast strength rye, 120 barrel samples were pulled, right? So that was based on trying to pull, our current MGP stock that was on the older side. So you pull 120 samples. And again, this is not me. This is Castle and Key tasting through all 120 samples and taking notes on all of them.
That's a tough day's work.
That's a tough day's work. It definitely cannot be done in a day. That's a few days' work. Out of those 120 barrels, 90 were identified that they wanted to work with. And it doesn't mean that the 30 that were in some way faulty or not of quality or not good. It was just more this idea of of the 120, here are 90 that we think will be the best to work with on this blend. From those 90, I was presented with 3 options that represented 65 barrel combinations of the 90 barrels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So each one, here's option 1, it's 65 barrels. Here's option 2, it's 65 barrels. Here's option 3, it's 65 barrels. Obviously, none of the 3 options were the same. They were all different combinations of the 90 barrels. And what I can tell you, which is very illustrative of what, Zeke, you were talking about before, is that people don't normally get to see or experience, was how dramatically different those 3 options were, in spite of the fact that the barrels were all roughly of the same age and roughly aged in the same part of the rickhouse and all that. And I was presented, of the 3 options, I was told, well, there's one option that I don't even want to bother to present you, not because it's horrible, but just because it's not nearly as good as the other 2. So here are 2 other options. The 2 options were so different from each other. Whereas one was this pure, more like high-tone citrus, fruit-driven expression of rye, and one was the darker, more tobacco, leather, spice, still really good fruit, and seemed to have a lot more age than the other one. The other one, while being really good, appeared more youthful. And I picked the one that seemed older than it was because I think it's more expressive of what the possibilities are.
And then did they give you the other one where they said we could blend these 2 together to get something completely different?
Well, I think that would have in essence been
the other one that they didn't want you to have.
Or something else. But, and
That's
I
where they
think,
flip you the bird and say, we gave you 2 options, stick with those.
But, the bottom line is they've done such a good job with that. And I think that, whatever it says on my email signature, I'm the master taster. At the end of the day, someone has to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down and ultimately decide. But the nuts and bolts of what it takes of, sitting in a room with a graduated cylinder. Can you imagine just the pure logistics of you have 65, you have 90 samples and now you have to create these 3 different combinations of various combinations of the 90 barrels. And you don't start by going 65 at a time. You have to break them into smaller groups of 12 to 14 and try to, which, we call as pods. Mm-hmm. And then start putting these different pods together, and then if the pods aren't working, breaking the pods down and reassembling them with different options. So, when I was talking to them about it, they were saying it was, a good 60 hours of work to get to.
That's not bad, honestly.
No, it's crazy. I got to spend some time with Ashley Barnes, who anybody who knows the whiskey industry knows. She's formerly Buffalo Trace and then Four Roses, and she worked with a local distillery here in Nashville, Pennington.
Okay.
And at the time, they gave her 11 barrels. And I got called in. It was a Sunday morning. Zeke's daughter was actually getting baptized that day. So I went down to the distillery, and I was sitting with them, and she's like, yeah, out of these 11 barrels, I think 3 are going here. 1 is a single barrel. And out of the rest that were left, I blended some together, and I got one that was like a grapefruit IPA. It was very fruity. And then there's one that I blended together of 4 that was just straight maple syrup.
Yep.
she's like, you have 2 profiles here from the whiskeys that you have, and it was on a much smaller scale. The other funny thing is, as we were sitting there recording, there were 100 other barrels that they were then giving her samples for to do the same thing. Or they were giving her samples of 100 other barrels to then go replicate what she did on a smaller scale, which is more of where you're at. But she ended up blending them together, and Zeke had this as well. It turned into this thing where it was a profile of the nose was very fruity and the taste was very dark and syrupy, and it was great. So she ended up doing that plan C. So plan A would have been more of a grapefruit IPA, fruity, lighter, would have been that summer pour. Blend 2 would have been that maple syrup. It would have been a really good fall, winter pour. It was thick. It really did taste like syrup. And then there was option 3, which was the combination of the both. But for her to sit there and say, okay, I took these 11 barrels and this is what I whipped up, was crazy to me. Just crazy. The fact that they can sit there and do that, and their palates are so in tune that they can pick out these little pieces and say, if I put it together this way, I mean, I think a lot of the way that Zeke and I blend, we try to have a rhyme or reason with it, and we try to tinker at home. We don't have enough time to do it. But a lot of times I think it's dumb luck that we fall into that, you know?
But I think it's also like, I mean, I know like me, you enjoy cooking a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're, I mean, I'll just pick something easy. Like if you're making coleslaw, which I think coleslaw needs a lot of salt. Like cabbage can take a lot of salt. And so like coleslaw, in my opinion, is mostly under-seasoned, right? And you taste it and you feel
I really
like
a broccoli slaw.
Well, that's delicious too. Yeah.
Sorry. No,
not at all. But whatever you're seasoning, right? And if you're someone who cooks a lot, it's not about a recipe at that point. You feel like it needs more salt. And you reach for the salt and you add more salt. And there's not, you just kind of have this feeling like, do I need a big pinch? Do I need a little pinch? I mean, if you cook a lot, less is always better because you can't take salt away.
Yeah, can't take anything back out.
But I think in that way, it's like if you cook a lot, it's kind of instinctual about the flavors are developing as you're cooking, and then you're trying to figure out like, oh, it needs something. Like, oh, I should put a little more vinegar in this. It needs a little more salt. It needs something else. I think like I should add more pepper. I think a little heat would be good. And you just kind of, as you go, and hopefully, sometimes better is the enemy of good, but, hopefully more often than not with cooking, you usually find your way and you feel like you're like, oh, that came out great. And I think that to me, the blending is similar to that, right? There's no exact formula, and you can't say each situation is different. The barrels are always changing, and you're just kind of feeling your way through. Yeah. It's like, you know what? I kind of feel like the way this barrel's tasting and the way those barrels are tasting, if you put them all together, I think it could be kind of interesting. And then you taste it and you're kind of like, that's not quite working for me. What about that other barrel that I thought was kind of weird? It could add something interesting in the mix, and you flow it in, and you're just kind of playing around. And I think going back to what we were saying before, that's the part that I find really fun. And again, this is absolutely not a knock on people who are blending for, consistency of flavor over time. But I find this way more interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a reverse perspective on tasting, so to speak. Because definitely, if I have the mindset I'm going to try and mix something together that I think is going to yield better than any of the individual parts alone, I don't pick out more than 2, sometimes 3 notes at best. It's literally just what really stands out about that product that I do or don't like. And even the don't likes can be more important to me than the do's.
Sure. Because
when you've got something else that doesn't offer that at all, then all right, well, I didn't like how much this was expressed over here on, this bottle on the right, but the one on the left and in the middle was completely missing. So, incrementally work it in to where it gets enough of it to be a balanced type product. And I just like being able to go back and think simply again at times. Like, all right, quit trying to find everything you're tasting, smelling, etc. Just the 1 or 2 things this does really well or doesn't do well, but what just stands out the most, and then line those up somehow.
You said the most important word to me, though, balance, right? Because my perception, just as someone who was an enthusiast first when I would taste whiskey, was that wine is always meant to be about balance, whereas I felt like whiskey is always, at least historically, has been made to be about notes, right? Like you pick a house style, and your house style is like, basically you've picked your notes, and then you just have to hit the same notes over and over and over again at the same proof. And the way you think about wine is really about balance, right? It's like if it's too earthy, it's too much. If it's too fruity, it's too much. You're looking for balance. You're looking for it to hit the middle, front, like front, middle, back of your palate. You're looking for a long finish. You're looking for aromatic complexity. And the way you would think about wine in terms of determining what's a great wine, if you had a wine that on the palate was incredibly complex, incredibly balanced, had a long finish, great balance of acidity and tannin and all those types of things, but on the nose was flat, then you wouldn't deem it to be a great wine because it was missing that one quality. And I'm not saying that we achieve it all the time with Pinhook, but at least in my head, that's how I think about it as a goal, is I want aromatic complexity. Like I'm just following the same kind of idea. I'm not interested in like, oh, we have to hit a bunch of specific notes. I just want whatever notes that you're getting to be balanced with each other. And the best indication I've gotten that maybe we're succeeding is that people who, let's say, are less enthusiasts, so they don't necessarily have the language to say, will just be like, oh man, this is really smooth. Mm-hmm. And I think smooth is another way of saying balanced, right?
Well, I think when people ask me what's my take on Pinhook, I always say, you got to understand, Sean's a wine guy first and foremost, but I think it is one of the most balanced whiskeys I've ever had. And I think it's because you have that wine approach first and foremost, where you try to bring that balance to your whiskeys. That really is, I want you to know it's appreciated, because I know it's always going to be, there's never going to be high notes, low notes. It's just going to be good notes as you're going through. I am a sucker for this bourbon country. I will tell you.
You're talking about the cask strength?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
The 115.3, I think, is one of my favorite pours that I have in the shelf right now. It's really, really, really good. The other thing I will mention is, Zeke, I think I would be a shitty blender, because the problem I have is I always get in trouble because I don't measure. When it comes to cooking, I never sit there and say, like, I need a half a cup of this, or, the closest I get to it is when I'm cooking rice. I might pour that in something, so I just know how much rice I have.
Yeah, you really want the 1 cup of rice and the 1 3/4 cups of water to actually cook it for 20 minutes after it boils on low heat. Yeah.
That is what I'm thinking. that
actually will yield a good product.
That is, I think, the only time I measure. But when it comes to salt, pepper, seasoning, whatever I'm putting on it, it's more of a feeling. Like, I'll put some on, like you said, less is more in the beginning. I'll put some on, I'll say, does it need a little bit more? Doesn't need a little bit more. Do you find that's the same thing, though, as you're going through? Because they give you a product. Mm-hmm. They give you a base. So if you think about it, Castle and Key, you are their client and partner. And I always like it when somebody is consulting for you and they come in with a point of view. So they came in with a point of view. They said, these are what we think the best are. Do you ever then go back to them and say, yeah, it's there, but I think it's missing a little bit of this, and I would love if we could balance this out?
Well, I think, first of all, it's been so far so good, and I also think that, we've only had the 1 cask strength bourbon. We have the rye coming.
Fair enough.
We have the rye coming. With the other stuff, and I honestly, I don't know the answer to this yet because I haven't done it enough, but I think the proof is so important. Mm-hmm. And that's the part where I am really tasting it all the way through and making that decision. And I guess what I mean by that is, I think back to Zeke's point when you guys recorded the show about rye humor.
You always call back to Zeke's points. You never call back to anything that I said.
You have awesome points, but his tasting notes, he always goes like, he goes very dramatic on the thing that he's catching. So with this, although you were on this track too, so let me give you your due as well. But he was on his or maybe were you the one who said barrel aged gin before he did? Maybe I should give you proper credit.
We both were there, but Zeke said it
he
first.
Vocalized it, so hence he's getting the credit. But the thing is, what I find so interesting about that, and I find it interesting when people taste this or bourbon and rye, is they have this experience where they're like, I didn't really know rye could taste like that. And then whether it's someone who doesn't know it's MGP or they don't know enough to say like, oh, MGP is this place. And basically they make this 95% rye, 5% malted barley thing. And that's the same stuff that you're going to get from High West and Smooth Ambler and James E. Pepper and on and on and on. Right. They taste it and they're like, they've never tasted anything like it. And what's fascinating to me is there's this idea of what rye is supposed to taste like that has been perpetuated by the people assembling it. But to the reaction you guys had from this, you're like, I don't think I've ever tasted a rye like this before. And yet you guys have tasted how much 95.5 rye?
Yeah.
Right. A lot.
At least a handful.
And this is, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back. It's more to illustrate a point about how unique you can make, bourbon or rye with the same ingredients. Is you've never tasted anything like this before.
No.
And my point is, when it comes to the proofing, we were to sit down and actually, I think this would make a great show. Not to propose that I've been very greedy to be on the show as many times as I have, but like it would be very interesting to sit down and do a proofing exercise where you taste it at 10 to 12 different proofs, and you see it's pretty bizarre when you actually see that like at 98 proof, like the fall vertical bourbon, going back to that. I tasted it between 93 and 100 going up the line. 93 and 98 proof were the only two, just when you just went down the line and you just go like this. Put your nose in the glass and you smell it. Particularly the 98, I smelled it and I was like, holy cow. Mm-hmm. That smells incredible. Like it's just like leaping out of the glass. But the extent, which I wish there was some way for me to illustrate it, talking about it. But the extent to which the 97 and the 99 on either side of it didn't come even close to achieving that is almost more extreme than you could imagine.
Can we do that? Because I mean,
absolutely, 100%.
You're not being greedy at all. No. You have an open door with us. We'd love anytime you're in town. We want you on.
I think it would be very illustrative, and I think you would really see how different it is. And I think so. That's where, when it comes to the proofing, you really see. I feel like with bourbon and rye or rye humor, I could have found a proof, regardless of the blend. I could have picked a proof that would have made the whiskey express itself more in the way that people expect rye to be, which is this kind of upfront spice, like kind of hits you up front with kind of spice and a little bit of like heat and almost a little bit of volatility, and
just like how I hit the table.
Just like how you hit the table. It's just a little whack to your sinuses and your senses.
But it is so versatile though, as far as in the space of rye.
It is versatile.
It's getting so hard to have a textbook description to me almost. Like you can tell me it's rye, and again, there's things that I would expect to be there and attributes that would be akin to the profile. But for the most part, it's really hard to pinpoint any aspect of, well, if this is a rye, I expect to taste ding, and whatever else. Because even then, none of them could be there and it's still being a great pour.
But it's so crazy. I just poured rye humor again because we were talking about it and I had to. The botanicals... It's almost crazy. Like it's botanicals on the nose.
But then I find after it sits in your glass, that almost, and not like normally you talk about something blowing off, like you're glad it blew off. There's to me, that's like something you get initially, and it kind of settles and it gets more fruity underneath it, more like pear and tropical fruit, and it kind of settles down. But I feel like right when you first pour it, it's very junipery, and that's that kind of gin. That gin note.
It's crazy though,
but it's also. I think what gets lost too is I think it's pretty soft on the palate. It's 97 proof. It's pushing, bottled and bond proof, and it's pretty. To my palate anyway, it's feels pretty delicate.
I think the hardest part that I would perceive from your side of the coin is not really so much being confident in, what I thought was good versus over the other one, but I feel like I inevitably 3 days later would go back, for whatever intangibles. You could blind yourself, and legitimately the one that did not win 3 days ago, it will win at times.
Yeah.
Just from, whatever else goes on with the palate, sensory stuff, etc. And then you're just kind of stuck like, well, shit, which one do I pull the trigger on here? Do I stick with the gut? Where do I go? Like, we've all been there. We've had something that, either did or didn't amaze us.
On it, like a barrel pick, and you tasted it when it was bottled.
And then you go back to it, and you're like, I just told all my friends this was the best thing ever, and I don't even like it. Or vice versa. I didn't like this at all, and man, I need about 3 of them.
A lot of times, too, on barrel picks, it's like they're going to proof it down to a certain proof. Or you're going to get some, depending on where you're at, there are some that are always going to be proofed at whatever proof.
Correct.
There are some that you're going to get wherever it is naturally. Those ones that proof it down, it's like the people that know what they're doing on a barrel pick, it's like you have a cap of water. And you're like, okay, I'm going to pour a couple drops in there so I don't pour too much in. I think I'm kind of getting it close to where it would be. And then you just got to pray that it tastes the way it did in your glass at a rick house, no matter what was going on. If it was raining, if it was winter, you didn't. The winter picks are the worst because you never get anything on the nose. They have you out there in the rick house, and it's
like
cold.
1 degree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, even cold juice isn't going to give off as much flavor either.
Yeah.
You just got to pray. I mean, it's like we just gave you the Drink More Turkey tonight. It's like we picked it. We picked the 9th and 11th barrel that we had that day, and the 11th was a short barrel, and the 9th was a full barrel. And I remember Zeke and I sitting there saying, these aren't that far off from each other. The shorty was longer on the finish, and the 9th, which was the A, had a lot of fruit on it, but neither one of them were too far off from each other. They were the most fruity that we got that day. It's like we hype it up, you get a good sticker for it, but you pray. You're like, I hope I was close enough putting water in there to get to 110 proof.
That was the best part about being 9 and 11 was, John was already a little, okay.
Well, it's also...
He's much more agreeable after a few pours.
No, I agree completely. But I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, I think though, that's why we do our single barrels at, not to plug ourselves, but that's why we do our single barrels at Cask Strength. For that reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just the closest thing to fair is that like you're tasting the barrel, and that's what you're going to get in the bottle.
And even then you could still cut it at the pick, and then in the back of your mind, this is why I really loved this one. It was in that proof. So then when it comes in, you tell folks like you're buying a Cask Strength product. You're more than welcome to put it wherever you want. When we picked it, or I picked it, or whoever picked it, we thought 5 drops will put you about in a sweet spot, or whatever recipe you want to go with, so to speak.
One thing I learned with the Cask Strength, which was new information for me, which I wouldn't be surprised if you guys are already familiar with this, but Castle and Key does not chill filter at all. So we're what you would either call like charcoal filtering, which is not like Lincoln County process, but like carbon dosing, right? So you're adding carbon into the tank. Product is dumped, goes into the first tank, gets agitated, goes into the second tank. You add carbon, it gets agitated again. It goes through the hose, passes through the filter. The charcoal is, grabbing all of the oils and everything else, and then comes out the other end, grabs the charcoal with all of the oils, etc., and then you move it to the third tank, filtering or proofing, and then to the bottling line, right? So when we were looking at how to handle the Cask Strength, what Castle and Key explained to me was that we would lose, even with carbon dosing, which is considered far superior to chill filtering as far as maintaining the integrity of the product, that we would lose 25% of the color as well as flavor as well as texture. And so the cast strength bourbon was only screen filtered. So it just went through a screen. That's it. There's no, which means, but the thing that I also learned, which I didn't know, was that, typically the reason that you're filtering besides, there are a lot of reasons that brands filter because it helps like basically almost bind all the barrels together in a better way, mouthfeel, consistency of color, batch over batch for these guys that need to put out 1,000 barrel batches 50 times a year to meet global demand. But the way that it came through doing it this way was to only screen filter it. Oh, but I'm sorry. What the point was, if you don't filter when you're bottling at lower proofs, then if you don't chill filter or carbon dose, you're going to get flocking, right? Mm-hmm. So if you put your bottle in your freezer, you pour it over ice, it's going to become cloudy. Well, once you go north of probably 96, 97 proof, flocking is typically no longer an issue.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, well, you're bottling at 115 proof, 115.3 proof. It
doesn't really matter what
it's irrelevant. You're not going to get flocking. So we were able to basically, to the best of our ability, take the 75 barrels, blend them together, put them through a screen filter, and put them in a bottle. And I do think, from what I've tasted at the distillery, that's at least one of the reasons why it tastes so good.
The whole time you were saying that, I was just holding myself back from saying chlorophyll sounds more like borophyll. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the future, though, and we've been talking for way too long.
Yeah, and this will be heavily edited, presumably.
No, probably not.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of good conversation.
Okay, good.
I'm even going to keep the basketball stuff.
Okay.
But as you move forward,
every time you started out a sentence with Zeke, and
that's
what he cuts out.
When Zeke said that
no,
awesome thing.
I'm going to leave that in there too. I will leave that in there, even though I thought Sean and I were closer than we were. But
the person that is like, the one person says, I don't know, it's just I'm getting a lot of caramel. I'm getting a lot of cinnamon. It's really nice. And the other person's like, Lipton iced tea. You're always going to remember Lipton iced tea.
Yeah. The other person's busy doing all the work.
It's a great balance here.
Yeah, it's a great balance.
He's kind of like the checks all the boxes.
I'm the one who makes sure the show gets up, edits it, posts all the social media, and the asshole that gets to sit back and say, yeah, I get lip nice tea. Anyway, so next year, all Castle and Key, right?
Yeah, next year all Castle and Key except
this
for the vertical. Yeah,
and this year we'll be finishing out. Right.
Yeah, this year we'll finish. So in early September, I guess, expect to see on the shelf a 65-barrel blend of cast strength rye, which is phenomenal. Connected to rye humor, gets its own beautiful teal wax and teal label. I love it. It's one of my favorites.
So what it will be now, though, is just one a year, right? So if you do the rye humor in the spring, that is, whatever strength it is. So this one is
that's
97.
Yeah.
So you do the proof down in the spring, and then you would do a cast strength in the fall.
Season. Yeah. It's also a way of like keeping in the spring. There's cast strength rye and the new vintage of rye, but then vertical rye, the new vintage of rye, and cast strength bourbon. So you've got like, in theory, like the rye season, but then you throw in one bourbon thing as well. So I hope that it's just fun for people that they know in the end that like each year, our current plan is that each year we'll be releasing 8 different products.
Damn.
Yeah, so the 8, and again, it's everything we just talked about. So in terms of I guess what I'd call our core product, which next year, as we said, is Castle and Key bourbon and rye. That will be, I guess, what we'll call our everyday rye. I don't know what else. What do people call the
drinkers
rye?
the everyday drinker.
The everyday drinker, the cast strength, and single barrel. And on the bourbon side, the same thing. And then there's the vertical bourbon and the vertical rye. So that's 8 things. And so the idea is each category has its own wax color that wax color.
Nice.
So, if you look, it would be ridiculous for me to hope that someone is going to collect all 8, different bottlings of Pinhook every year. But someone could say, like, I like their everyday rye and I love collecting their cask strength bourbon. And so every year they're going to see a new horse on that product, different product in the bottle, different vintage date.
Makes sense.
And so that's for the foreseeable future. I mean, I'm sure like everyone will get around to fiddling around with experimental stuff. I mean, I was way more interested in wine barrel finishes and all that kind of stuff when we first got started in 2010. Now so many people are doing that it's almost making me flip the other way, where I feel like a traditionalist, where we're just like, we do cask strength, we do single barrel, we do the everyday thing.
We appreciate
let's just make it as good as we can.
We're not all about the wine finish.
We like French oak, but not so much on the wine.
We also have enough moving parts, don't we? There's a new horse, there are 8 things, there are different wax colors, so we'll try to simplify it.
And there's enough things. I mean, we were talking about, before we started recording, water sources, and I don't even want to get us on that tangent because we're already an hour and a half into this, but there's so much that is actually involved in what you have to do here. I think at this point, finishing, you have a very balanced product. The question I would ask you is, what's a finish actually going to add that you don't already have?
My only question, to throw it back to you, based on some things that I've tasted, what did I taste recently that made me think of this? Oh, the Whistle Pig Mauve, right? It's 13 years. World. It's 13 years old, and is it Calvados finished or something like that? I think that's right. But anyway, I thought it was really well balanced. And and we were talking about this earlier, I typically don't like older whiskey because I think that bitter wood tannin starts to creep in and ruin it. However, tasting that one in particular, it made me feel like the sweetness from the finish was balancing the bitterness of the wood. So it's making me wonder, and maybe we'll find out as we start having older product, is if I feel that's the way, like, how can you create... there's some good things that are obviously happening as it's getting older, but if the bitter wood tannin takes over everything, it kind of maybe ruins those other good things. So going back to the idea of balance, maybe that's where the finishes are really nice, not on something younger, but the finishes help you on an older product balance the bitter wood tannin.
Just
maybe.
Release it.
It's just a thought. I have
just
no idea.
Release it a couple years earlier.
That would be easier.
Get your money quicker. Anyways, where can the folks find you? They can find you at Pinhook Bourbon on Instagram.
Yeah, Pinhook Bourbon. I'm #Bourbon. We got, that's
Pinhook's in 23 states
We're
now,
in 23 states.
Pinhookbourbon.com.
Pinhookbourbon.com. Check out, can I do this? Can I say check out our app?
Yeah.
It's a cool app.
I have the app. It's awesome.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's a free download. Soon to be, no offense to the Android people, but currently only available for the iPhone, but soon to be available for Android. But right now it's a free download on the Apple Store. And basically one function is that it recognizes which horse is on the bottle and then gives you detailed information and breaks down some of the technical terms, which not everyone spent time working in the horse business like John. So for those people, you might say, I don't know what hands are. I don't know what that means.
I should screenshot this, though.
This guy right here.
Because I should screenshot this because I have the app open right now. And it's, as you look at the bottle, it's going to have all these pluses and it's going to go to the different things that are in the bottle. So it will tell you, what is the horse name? What is the horse size? So hands are the unit of measurement for horses' heights, taken from the ground to the top of the withers, high point of the shoulder blades. One hand is roughly 4 inches. So if you think about it, with people actually putting their hand up and up and up. So when you hear a horse is 17 and a half hands, just go 17 and a half times 4, and you roughly will get to the number of inches that a horse is tall.
And we also have there are tasting notes in there, mash bills, age, the whole thing. So there
are recipes in here too, right?
We haven't gotten to the cocktail recipes yet, but that is certainly coming. And the library, as you can see, only includes bourbon and rye humor, and bourbon country, but will soon include, the future releases as well.
but just search Pinhook in...
Yeah, it's Pinhook AR app for augmented reality. So, just look for it in the App Store.
It's pretty awesome. You can find Zeke and I on Facebook at Dad's Drinking Bourbon, Twitter at Bourbon Dads, Instagram at Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Join our Facebook group. Answer a couple questions. We'd love to get you in. That's also where you can find out all the good things that we are doing, like how this weekend, how tomorrow I will be in Townsend, Tennessee, while Zeke is on vacation. I will be hanging out with some East Tennessee distilleries. I'm bringing the family out to East Tennessee, going to be in a cabin, and I'm going to interview some of the East Tennessee distilleries while Zeke is down on the beach. But if you are at the Little Arrow Resort, come check us out. There are going to be some tickets, but mostly it's people that are hanging out and actually staying at the resort over the weekend can be a part of this. They're actually going to have us sit around a fire. There's going to be some s'mores, Zeke.
I just hope you find some TTB registered distillers while you're in East Tennessee and bring back a quart or two.
I'm going to be looking for the same thing. All those people out in East Tennessee, they claim to be selling shine. I want the real stuff.
Exactly.
But go ahead and find Little Arrow Resort. Come check us out there. It's just going to be me this weekend, but it will be worth it. And happy Father's Day to everybody. Find us on your favorite podcast app. Leave us an open and honest review, just as we would leave an open and honest review to the whiskey that we are drinking. Zeke, where else can the folks find us?
Nashville, Tennessee.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, guys.